Okay.
And we're on.
Okay. Good afternoon. For the record,
My name is Debbie New and I live in South Burlington.
we are back here with the Energy and Environment and Energy Committee on 305, looking at potential language around thermal energy. That's our legislative last week.
I really appreciate being able to talk with you today about thermal energy networks. I am going to lay some of the groundwork and tell you what Vermont communities are working on and hoping to do. And then Jim DeMont is going to speak about the bill specifically. So my name is Debbie and I coordinate the Vermont Community Thermal Networks to bring this local heating and cooling solution that is on the neighborhood scale to our communities in Vermont. I also help to lead an energy action network team that's focused on accelerating thermal energy network development in Vermont. Many of us are familiar with the terms geothermal or network geothermal, and those are words that are often applied to this bill. The Vermont bill is called Thermal Energy Networks. It refers to that because of other existing policies, and nationally, that term is the broadest term to discuss this kind of system. Right now in Vermont, a college campus or a private business as a single owner on its own land can install a thermal energy network. Champlain College and Hula in Burlington are both heating and cooling buildings with thermal energy from underground. We need to pass the Thermal Energy Networks Act to tap into the opportunity for our towns and cities to do this too, to take advantage of the heat that we already have. Ground source heat pumps and underground pipes are a proven technology that make up a thermal energy network. They are working in Vermont as geothermal systems for single buildings, but they can't be as widely used or networked to serve a community until this bill passes. As shared infrastructure, a thermal energy network that serves the public requires authorization. More and more Vermont communities, residents, businesses, and elected leaders alike want to develop these networks to leverage the local resources and opportunities they have. This bill is needed not only to dramatically reduce fossil fuel use and emissions, but also to allow Vermonters to access unprecedented levels of federal funding that these systems qualify for now for clean energy and community infrastructure. As we all know, heat is a precious resource in Vermont. We spend a lot of time, effort, and money making it, moving it, and trying to save it. We also need to devote more attention and time to cooling our buildings, making our energy systems more resilient, and storing heat so we can use it when we need it. Thermal energy networks do all of this. They are a tool to help us achieve our climate goals, save money, relieve energy burdens, create resilience, and take control of our own energy. So what would a thermal energy network look like in a Vermont town? First, once it's installed, you wouldn't see it. A parking lot, a green space, an athletic field could host geothermal bore field, the underground vertical pipe system that accesses the underground temperatures. Like the solar battery of the earth, if you will. The temperature isn't coming up from the hot rocks like happens in Iceland and with geysers. It is actually the energy of the sun that is captured in the earth and is held at about 50 degrees year-round underground here in Vermont. So not all thermal energy networks require this energy. Many of them can use it to their advantage. We're also talking about other kinds of heat that is already being wasted. It's either flushed down the drain in wastewater or vented from large buildings, refrigeration systems, and commercial or industrial processes that generate a lot of heat, such as to dry whey to make cheese or freeze ice cream in Vermont factories. Right now, we are wasting almost all of this heat that we have produced and paid for. A thermal energy network accesses the moderate temperatures of these kinds of heat and moves them where they're needed via mainly water in horizontal pipes underground. This water-based system is not high heat or steam, which is part of why it's so efficient. The components are simple and long-lasting. They just access and pump heat. They don't need to produce it. So whether it's 20 below or 90 degrees outside, they will keep us comfortable year-round. Thermal energy networks are a community scale solution. We know how vital it is for us to ramp up our efforts to decarbonize our buildings. One important pathway is through air source heat pumps, but this one building or one appliance approach at a time doesn't need to be the only way. We can also share heat with shared infrastructure, bringing heating and cooling to many buildings at once. Thermal energy networks can also help us reserve electricity to where it's needed most. Because they harness and repurpose more moderate temperatures and that are constant, they use significantly less electricity than other heat pumps. So in brief, they make electrification go further and faster. This high efficiency of these kinds of ground source heat pumps can shave electric peaks and mean we don't have to build out as much electric infrastructure to meet our needs. So using less electricity will keep customer bills lower because of shaving peaks and building out less grid and help us all save money. Also, by reusing existing heat, we can also reserve electricity for where it's needed most and diversify our energy sources, not relying on just electricity to keep us warm and cool. So this increases both our resilience and our independence from importing energy from out of state. Thermal energy networks have a lot of other benefits, which include they're safe, healthy, and clean. Nothing is burned, so there are no emissions, no pollution, and no risk of explosions. They're equitable. As community scale infrastructure, they can be accessible and affordable across a neighborhood. And as this bill allows, using a utility model, customer costs can be low and predictable through rates over time. They're also resilient. System components are inside and underground, making them flexible in design, resilient in extreme weather, and reliable with very low maintenance. Importantly, thermal energy networks can be part of a just transition. Gas, oil, and propane workers have the plumbing and pipe fitting skills required to install thermal energy network components, and the same businesses can keep in business providing a thermal energy network. So when we leverage local heat, we can also transition our local thermal workforce with minimal retraining to secure quality jobs. Vermont communities are starting to see heat differently. Many local leaders, regional planners, economic development corporations, and other Vermonters are organizing to use the potential we have to share heat across our communities. Over a dozen communities are seriously exploring what they can do, identifying clusters of buildings, ownership models, and financing opportunities. St. Johnsbury, St. Albans, and Middlebury are hosting community workshops this month to jumpstart the development process, and other towns are lining up. Unlike electricity, thermal energy is actionable for our communities, for us locally. We can start small with a few buildings sharing heat and build larger networks over time. Our towns, businesses, and community organizations can implement thermal solutions alongside projects already planned for new housing, for water and wastewater systems, for municipal building improvements through the MERP program, and downtown revitalization projects. There's lots of ways for them to fit in with what our towns are already doing. As one local leader put it, the technology is straightforward and well established. Small groups of people can actually do this. It's achievable. There are many options and every situation will be a little different, but normal people can figure it out, is what he said. Finally, thermal energy networks also give our communities agency. As one select board member said, I like that we're not just replicating something prepackaged. We're asking questions, we're learning, and we're implementing it ourselves. So people are more willing, more receptive. Our town has agency. That municipality is just one of many that wants to keep energy dollars local and leverage the economic benefits of taking thermal energy into their own hands. We have a huge opportunity in Vermont to make the most of thermal energy networks where they make sense, particularly for new construction and in our town centers where we're working already to add housing, increase density, and create vibrant communities. This is a proven solution. Funding is available now, federally, and people are ready to take action. This bill does not require state or taxpayer money and is needed to allow Vermonters to build thermal energy networks in their communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Is there any other communities, any other states that have implemented this network yet, have tried this?
Yes, so New York, there are many networks that are underway. They passed a big bill that Jim will talk about. In Massachusetts, in Framingham, there is a network going in as a pilot for a gas company. So that's one model of doing this. In Canada, in Vancouver, there is a downtown that has a wastewater treatment plant that is providing heating and cooling to an entire neighborhood. And that is a municipal system. It is based on rates, and it is earning a return for the taxpayers. In West Union, Iowa, it's a rural town, and they have a downtown revitalization project. They have a networked geothermal system that businesses have attached to. They're expanding it, and it is owned locally.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. It sounds to me like what you said was that geothermal systems work much better and are more affordable in new development.
New construction is a huge opportunity, as someone call it, a no-brainer opportunity
Sure.
to install these systems because of not having to retrofit. There are some systems that are easier to retrofit than others, systems that already use water in pipes inside the buildings or are ducted, if you will. That makes sense?
It does. So can it be kind of pricey if someone has an existing home and they want to convert or add geothermal to what might be existing, or I don't know how they go about doing it, but is that kind of an expensive process?
The upfront costs are bigger for thermal energy networks and for geothermal energy than an air source heat pump.
On an existing home?
Yes,
Okay.
they are, especially if it's a geothermal system and there's drilling involved. So that's why we want to use as much waste heat and heat from wastewater as possible, because it will help keep costs lower the less drilling we have to do.
Part of the reason I asked was I spoke with some folks a week or so ago, and they have gone with the geothermal and their electricity bill is twice as much as it was. So I don't know if you're familiar with circumstances like that happening. And if you are, I'd like to know why that happens.
I am focused on community scale networks of these solutions, so I'm not that familiar with residential applications. You're asking an important question. When there is a network, it can be much more efficient than a single building installation, especially for a single home, which requires all of the upfront costs with no sharing potential. Because buildings need different kinds of thermal energy at different times. In a network, that can be shared, and the cost can be shared across buildings. And so it can be much more economical and efficient the more buildings you connect.
Sure. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Representative Pat.
Just first of all, just a very quick answer, because I was remembering complaints I had back when I worked in the utility business in the early days of heat pumps from people whose electric bills shot up. Yeah, they shot. You're going to be running a whole bunch. You're going to be running pumps that you weren't running before in order to move the heat. So your electric bill, it's a matter of how much and everything else, but your electric bill will definitely go up, whether it's a small scale or large scale. My question is, and I definitely support the concept, particularly of district heat. My question that I've always asked, because I was in the energy business, is that with every source of energy, there are downsides or limits to the resource. And you don't have to go into a big answer about that now, but I would like to hear someone just sort of catalog what are the limitations by location or whatever it is. I would like to understand more of that, and I don't want to take up a whole lot of time with that now. So, but I think that's an issue we should all also understand, because whatever source or technology you're looking at, there's always at least a little bit of a yes, but.
Great. So can I respond briefly to that?
Sure.
So it's definitely not the newest, latest, greatest technology because it's proven. We've seen it work, but it's also not a silver bullet. You're absolutely right to be asking that question. I would say the biggest barrier, the biggest challenge for us is the upfront cost. And that's why the Inflation Reduction Act is such an advantage right now through 2032. And it's important for us to maximize that out as much as we possibly can. The other thing that people often don't know is that Vermont's bedrock is really good at conducting thermal energy and can be an advantage over sand. It means you don't have to pay as much for casing the borehole. There are technical things involved. But I would also say that what we need also is workforce, which is a familiar theme in clean energy and across the board, but we are working on that as well.
So, and my question, what I keep thinking about is, are there limits by location to the actual resource of the, the heat?
Yeah, I've spoken with some Vermont drillers and they do say there are places in Vermont they would not drill.
Good.
There are places at the foot of the Green Mountains that have a lot of sand. And so that can be expensive. So that's why they wouldn't go there. So there is that. There are also places where we don't have enough waste heat to make an installation economical and efficient. So that's why town centers, places with wastewater treatment plants, places where there is industry, industrial parks, like there are in St. Albans, there's a lot of heat there. But that's not true everywhere. At the same time, I do want to say an equity point is that we're working hard with regional planning commission people to identify small town opportunities, because we don't want people to assume that this technology is only for places where there is significant density or there are large grocery stores. They can still make use of the heat they already have.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we'll hear from James Dumont.
Trixie?
Good afternoon, everybody. This news is amazing. What she has accomplished already in Vermont is just awesome. So thank you, Debbie. She has educated me about this, and I sort of acted as her lawyer. And I started by looking at what did they do in New York? New York is really the leader in this. In the materials I sent it, I had referred to the New York bill.
Dumont.
And I think
Could just, for the record,
Sure.
your affiliation.
James Dumont, I'm an attorney in Bristol, and here as a citizen working with Ms. New. The full title of the New York Act is not what I put in the materials. The full title is the New York Thermal Energy Network and Jobs Act. I left the "and jobs" part out of my materials, but that was really central to the New York bill. And as you've seen in the materials, the New York bill was supported by labor, supported by business and utilities, and supported by the environmental movement in Albany. And because of that, it passed the New York State Senate unanimously, which is, as far as I know, unheard of. I mean, as much as politics may be rough and tumble in Vermont, it's at a much higher level in Albany. And they passed this bill unanimously in the Senate, and then it was signed by the governor within several days. It was because there are no losers with this bill. In answer to some of the questions that Debbie had, I would just point out one really interesting study that I think Representative Torrey already knows about, and that is the Dunsky consulting firm, which is a high-level energy consulting firm, did a study and compared the cost of air source heat pumps in Canada, which is at least as cold as Vermont, with the cost, overall social cost included, of ground source heat pumps, thermal energy networks going forward. And they said, if we're going to save and cut back on climate greenhouse gases in Canada, the plan until then has been, we need to switch to air source heat pumps and use electricity. But they said, if we used ground source heat pumps instead of air source heat pumps, the savings in Canada would be $50 to $150 billion. Because the ground source heat pumps are so much more efficient than air source heat pumps. And yes, there is an upfront cost, but it more than pays for itself economically alone. Then there's the greenhouse gas savings as well. So we took the New York bill and we tried to make it fit Vermont. And there are two major changes from the New York bill. In New York, the 7 largest electric utilities and the 7 largest gas utilities must do this. Each one of them must submit at least one pilot project, it may be as many as either 5 or 7. It's mandatory. The Vermont bill that you have in front of you is completely optional. It doesn't force any utility to do anything. It authorizes them to act. It does not require them to act. And I think you'll hear later from Vermont Gas about their feelings about the bill, that we've worked with them to come up with the best language possible. So that's one major change. The second is that in this bill, municipalities are given the right to do this without going through the PUC process. We met with a leading municipal lawyer in Vermont who really convinced us that that was the right way to go, because in Vermont already we have municipal sewer departments, we have municipal water departments, and they don't need PUC oversight. They're accountable to the public that elects them. And there's no reason that municipally owned thermal energy networks should be any different. In fact, the technologies are very similar. In fact, it's probably more complicated to construct and run a wastewater treatment plant than it is the thermal energy network. The technology is much simpler. You're just collecting the heat from, using a closed loop system. You're not treating wastewater and collecting everybody's wastewater in the town. So the bill says any municipality that elects to, nobody's forcing them to, can adopt a thermal energy network just as it has a sewer department and a water department. And this gets to one of my favorite subjects as a lawyer, which some of you may have dealt with, which is Dillon's rule. Dillon's rule is named after a famous judge from the 19th century. And he came up with this theory that the Vermont Supreme Court has adopted, as many states Supreme Courts have. And it's clearly the law of Vermont. And under Dillon's rule, towns and cities have only that authority which is explicitly granted to them in their charter or in the general laws, or that authority which is necessarily implied in the explicit grant. And we've looked at as many charters as we could, and we found one town that had a charter that would authorize thermal energy networks. One out of many that we looked at. So instead of amending 250 or 251 charters, we suggest the language in this bill, which says in just a few sentences, any municipality has the same authority to engage in thermal energy network operation, construction, operation, and funding as it does for sewer and water. And that opens the field up for the many folks that Debbie has been working with to do what they want to do. Unless this bill passes, they can't do it. Lawyers who sign as bond counsel to finance this, they're not going to be able to sign the letter of approval as bond counsel unless this bill passes, because it's not clear that towns have the authority to get into this business. That's one of the key points I wanted to make. I want to talk about the utility model just briefly. As Debbie said, this does not require tax dollars. This is paid for in general through rates, just like an electric bill or a water bill or a gas bill. There's an initial upfront investment. That's the basic utility model. And then the utility recovers their upfront costs and a return on their investment through rates. And what we proposed in the language that's in front of you is that if it's a municipality, they do it on their own. But if it's an investor-owned utility, it's just like electric, just like gas. The rates will be subject to approval to protect members of the public by the PUC. I think those are the basics. Material is a nice schematic of how this works.
You sent that to us.
Yes, you have it. And we also attached a letter of support that makes much the same points signed by the Champlain Housing Trust, some energy committees, IBISAR, BNRC, VPIRG, and the Sierra Club.
The chair had asked that I ask about why municipalities are exempt, but I think you've gone through that. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Sure. The New York Public Service Commission was tasked with coming up with regulations to implement the New York bill. And their final regulations are due on July 5th of this coming year. In the meantime, their staff has issued a report, and their staff has recommended that in the regulations, they exempt municipalities for the same reason that this bill exempts them. They're locally accountable. They don't need Public Service Board or PUC oversight. And so the staff for the New York PSC has proposed that their rules do what we have in this draft, which is exempt municipalities. Go ahead.
Representative Pat? Yes.
Okay. Just, again, something I've been wondering about because in Vermont, municipalities that run electric systems are regulated by the PUC. So I just wonder, I don't have, I'm just curious about that.
I was too. And when we first drafted this bill a year and a half ago, it made sense to me to follow that model, municipal electrics, which you know so much more about than I do. But then after hearing many comments and speaking to the municipal lawyer, we realized that was a mistake. This is much more like municipal water and municipal sewer than it is like municipal electricity. And it doesn't seem to need PUC oversight.
There are questions for Mr. Dumont. Right. Thank
Thank you.
you very much for your testimony.
Actually, can I ask a question?
Yes,
Jim,
Representative Bonner.
private developers can do this. This doesn't affect make it easier or harder for private developers.
That's a great question.
They can do it now.
If you're, say, Champlain College or you're anyone and you're providing the service on your own land, the bill makes clear that this doesn't apply to that. It's only if we're providing this service to third parties, like a utility customer, basically, then you got to go through the PUC. So if
Even if it's a small, this is what I want you to get at. Even if it's, for instance, Evernorth doing a project, but then they help make it work by bringing in a few houses nearby, would that trigger the need to go to?
the New York Public Service Commission staff has recommended a small, I wouldn't say de minimis, but an exemption for that situation. And when we see their final rules in July, there will be an exemption for what you're describing. And this draft bill calls upon the PUC to do the same thing here, to say, yes, in addition to municipalities, there should be a small utility exemption.
Okay.
It's in the draft.
Rep Stebbins, that's right. Okay,
Thank you.
Representative Stebbins. Oh, I'm sorry, one moment. We have someone virtually. Representative Stebbins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And hi, apologies, I'm not there. I just have a question. We've heard from towns that, frankly, are struggling under the weight of the things that they have to manage with often, volunteer staff. And I think one of the questions, I understand the rationale that there are towns already managing wastewater or water. But I guess, we've also seen things in the news about towns that may have struggled with some of the wastewater and water management systems that they've been trying to work with over the last 10, 20, 30, 40 some odd years. So I guess my question to you is, do you see any risk of sort of not having any PUC regulatory oversight or other oversight? And I think that was, if you could just comment on that, that'd be appreciated.
I would never say there's no risk of anything. But I think the risk for municipally controlled operations is really a low risk. For this to fly, people are going to have to invest time and energy to understand it. And as Debbie knows more about this than I do, but part of what she foresees and I foresee is that there will be commercial operations. And we already know some engineers in this business who are waiting to work for municipalities by contract and say, here's what your system would look like. You'll have to do you can't do this without an engineering study. So you have to have an engineer up front say, this is where you can do it, where you can't do it. So you have to have an engineer, and then there would be others who could be contracted with by the town to put the system up and running. And you could even have a contract with an entity to run it for you if you wanted to as a town. Does that make sense? Yep.
Thanks.
Are you all set, Representative Stebbins? Okay.
And in answer to that, I think it's quite possible that Vermont Gas Systems itself might provide those services to municipalities once Vermont Gas acquires its own expertise. And that's a discussion we've had with them, that there might be a good way for them to use their trained workforce to act as a contract provider of services to towns.
There are questions for Mr. Dumont. Thank
Thank you.
you very much for joining us. Okay, let's hear from the towns, and cities.
So much. Ted Brady, the Executive Director of the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. Nice to see you again. Keep it short and sweet. You're considering a bill that gives municipalities more authority to do something without requiring them to do it and not telling them they have to pay for it all on their own without any support from the state. So in general, of course, the League of Cities and Towns would support something like this with the caveat and just the warning that once again, authorizing something like this to occur will not result in many of this occurring unless we all realize that we have to stop strangling towns by saying the only way you can raise money is by the property tax. And so just another call every chance they can get to remind you about the need for towns to be able to adopt local option taxes, the need for Vermont to join all of its neighbors in the state of New York, in New England, by allowing some sort of municipal revenue sharing, and the need to reevaluate some of our grants that are not exactly models of equity for towns that don't have the resources to do competitive grant applications, and talk about non-competitive funding sources for smaller towns. But the headline is this gives us an authority to do something that I think some towns would like to do, and there'd be no reason in our mind to say no.
Representative Pat.
Wouldn't this, under certain circumstances, and maybe once this is developed a little more, be something that towns could bond for in order to finance?
Absolutely. I think that would be the only way towns would do it. And I think the reality is some towns are unwilling to bond, even though the 10 or 20-year payback is so wonderful. It's so we'd hope there'd be a way for the state to co-fund these with a bond, just like we do with water and wastewater.
Okay. Other questions?
I love late afternoons.
So far.
Thanks.
I guess.
Oh.
Just thinking about the different capacities of towns that might be interested. What type of permits would get triggered, do you think?
Yeah, I think every type of,
Act
Act 250 would be triggered, all the A&R permitting, you're touching groundwater. I assume that you're going to be having a lot of conversations with people that worry about groundwater. So I don't,
Doesn't mean it's gonna be like in any way being exempted from the PUC piece, doesn't exempt it from being responsible for development.
right, I think the biggest advantage to being exempted from the PUC, from the certificate of public good is the rate question, right? Where same with water and sewer right now, right? I believe municipalities are exempted from certificate of public good, and that results in them not having to petition every rate change they have. And I think, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a historian, but I believe that's because the policy is that unlike a utility, a private utility, the rate setting is directly accountable to a democratic process that could unseat the people that set that rate. So I think that's the big advantage, is just the rate setting question.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay.
All right, nice to see you all.
Last but not least, our friends from the PUC are here.
Good afternoon, folks. Representative Sebelius, members of the committee. I'm Greg Faber. I work for the PUC. And you want to hear about this amendment, I'm assuming? Okay. So we've taken a look at this. As you know, we're presently working on some other projects, the clean heat standard, the renewable energy standard bill. That creates a large amount of work for us. This bill would have us basically invent a new category of regulation for geothermal. It involves rate regulation. As you can guess, that would be a lot of work. That being said, we're okay with exempting municipalities if they want to go ahead and do this type of thing. It doesn't seem like there's a large appetite for it based on the last witness, but and maybe exempting low-income housing from doing this if they want to do that. It looks like they can already do that if they're building on their own property. We would offer to do a report and maybe learn from the experiences of municipalities, maybe learn from the regulations that are being put in place in New York State. And we could come back with better specificity and tell you how much this is going to take, how many new positions it'll take, what kind of appropriations we would need to fund this type of operation. I mean, to date, we only know of one utility that's interested in doing this type of thing. There could be more, but we just haven't heard that there's a huge groundswell of interest. So we would recommend taking the time, allow us to January of 2026 to come back with a report to the legislature and detail all the components that would be involved in this, how long it would take us for doing a rulemaking, what kind of regulation we would envision. So that's our recommendation right now.
Can you give me a sense of, and I know this is really just a guess, but it'll be an educated guess. If we were to have that report come back from you in January 2026 and pass something asking you to move forward, how long and let's say that goes into place in July of 2026, what would we be looking at for a potential effective date?
Rulemaking, as you probably know, takes about a year. This is a complex one, so I would go 18 months. So if it takes place in July, you're looking at a year and a half from there, at a minimum.
January 27.
Yeah. Well, no, a year and a half.
28.
So yeah,
28.
whatever it is. And if you wanted, if you wanted to do stakeholder meetings around the state, things like that, you have to keep that in mind too. That obviously would affect the timeline, but a typical rulemaking is going to take about a year. A complex one, a little bit more. And that's the way to look at it, I think.
And to get this report from you all by January of 2026, would that require any additional resources?
It'll just require the current staff to work on it. That's why we're asking for a little bit more time than we usually would, given the clean heat standard and the RES and the other 4 amendments to this bill. So we would like at least until then to do those. But we think that's a good compromise at this stage anyway.
In the interim, I think you said you're okay with exempting municipalities.
I don't see any problem with allowing municipalities to do it similar to water companies right now. I think that's a good model and it would work for this type of thing. And folks who already have property, as I understand, can already do it. So a low income apartment building, I'm assuming they could probably just do it. But I wouldn't exempt VGS to go ahead, start doing this right now. I would wait for the report to come back.
Committee, any questions? Favor?
So
Yes.
just to be clear, what we're talking about, the bill would call on you to initiate rulemaking in a few months. And
Oh, yeah.
saying rather than initiate rulemaking in a few months, take 18 months to do a report and then.
And then initiate the rulemaking. Yes, that is what I'm saying. The bill right now would have us do rulemaking rather quickly. The timelines in there are really not feasible to begin with, but we're not here to quibble about that. I'd rather just do the rule, figure out what we have to do, show you folks, and then get the go ahead from you. Like, yeah, we really want to do this. Go ahead and start your rulemaking, start the rate making. Yeah.
Any financial risks that occur to you or municipalities with this type of an exemption? So, I mean, I'd imagine they'd be the
It would be
same.
the same as a municipal water company. I can't imagine if that's risky, but I've never heard of that. They seem to run those pretty well. They set their own rates. We're not involved in that. We do the little tiny water companies, the non-municipal ones, but they seem to function quite well. So
Is it A&R that would be assisting municipalities largely with this as opposed to
A&R?
department?
if they were
Natural resources.
digging into the ground, I assume they would coordinate on the water resources and contamination. under the town zoning and all that. Yeah, it would go through Act 250.
Questions? Anything else in the room gathered? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much for your testimony. That is it for today. And yes,
Would you like to address the radar provisions as well, which I didn't talk about, or?
would I like you to address the ratepayer?
Ratepayer protection language that.
Oh, I see.
Oh,
Sure, while you're here, if you would like to, if this is a different piece of language that has been sent, and would be fairly brief comments.
Yes.
This is it's not ratepayer protection any longer.
Cost containment.
Thank you. And is Rep. Stebbins still with us? She is. Let's fit that, and it is posted on our page from Friday, I believe, right?
Right, I moved on today, but you can find it up.
Energy cost stabilization study.
Wait one moment. Okay, great. It's language to consider adding in. So it's dated 4/2, draft 1.2 is what I'm looking at.
I obtained from the website draft 1.4 dated April 5th.
Okay. Let's proceed with that.
This is Jim Dumont from Bristol. Going to address what is now draft 1.4 of proposed changes proposed by Representative Stebbins for S305. It proposes an energy cost stabilization study that looks not just at electric costs to ratepayers, but a broader set of energy costs for Vermont residents. My testimony will focus on the electric ratepayer part of it, although the draft is broader than that, rightfully. In a nutshell, affordable electricity is not just a fairness issue. It is an environmental issue. And that is because by keeping electricity affordable, Vermont encourages consumers to switch to electricity. If we're going to decarbonize buildings and decarbonize transportation, Vermonters need to know that they will be protected when they move more and more of their eggs into the electricity basket. Right now, they don't have all their eggs in that basket. It's basically Vermont policy to try and shift more and more of their eggs into that basket. And we need protection so that particularly low-income Vermonters feel it's safe to do that. Much of my prepared materials is actually from a study that was done by experts for the department about 2 years ago. And as the study pointed out, the generally accepted level of affordability for expenditures on energy is, for an American family, is 6% of income. As of 2018, 74,000 Vermont families at or below 200% of the federal poverty level were paying from 11% to 51% of their income on home energy. It's 51%. That means you're not paying your rent, or you're not paying for food, or you're not paying for your medicine. There is an existing energy assistance program for Green Mountain Power customers and some at Burlington Electric. However, the data is that only about 25% of GMP's customers have used that program. And the study that was commissioned for the department looked at why is that? And what they found is that the low number of participants may result from the low level of discount that's offered by the program. It's a much lower discount than than low-income customers get in other states, which I'll get to in a minute. The low level of discount may provide insufficient incentive to complete the application process, which must be repeated every year. In addition, as this report pointed out, the Energy Assistance Program fails to adopt best practices that are recommended by experts, such as automatic enrollment for those who qualify for LIHEAP or 3 Squares Vermont. Online enrollment or self-certification with enrollment effective at the date of application. These are what the experts say actually get low-income ratepayers to sign up for these programs instead of having to fill out more and more paperwork every year. And that's not in the existing program. So Vermont lags behind other states. And I know this usually embarrasses Vermonters to hear it, but New Hampshire does a better job than we do. As painful as it is to say that. In New Hampshire, low-income ratepayers can get up to 76% of their bill paid for, not 25%. It's a big difference if you're trying to get by on a limited income. So what this bill does is not,
Thank you. 76%,
yes,
that's probably covered by the middle-class taxpayers in New Hampshire. That compensates the 76%, would you say?
paid for by other ratepayers.
We talked about this a week or so ago, and I think it was GMP that said they could, if you fit into the income category, you can get 25% off of your rates.
Right.
Wouldn't it stand to reason that, middle-class taxpayers in Vermont or ratepayers in Vermont, they pay for electricity just like the lower income people do. So instead of 25% off, why couldn't GMP give everybody 10 or 15 or 12.5% off so that the people that are subsidizing will get a discount as well?
Well, I guess I would just remind us all that we have multiple utilities in the state.
Oh,
So I guess I would just
any
encourage us.
utility. I won't just pinpoint GMP. Thank you.
Yes.
But that's a great point. And the study points out that in other states, the benefit is not restricted to people on 150 or 200% of FPL. For example, a common dividing line is 60% of state median income. So lower middle class are not paying this.
So, Mr. Dumont, one of the things that we know here, and we've talked about a bit with the renewable energy standard, is the regulatory kind of structure in Vermont is different than many of our neighbors, and resulting in much lower rates actually than our neighbors. So I would just caution us that that may also have something to do with the difference in reimbursement.
So I'll finish up quickly.
Sure.
The PUC opened the docket to look at these questions about 2 years ago, and they closed it without issuing any orders. But they did issue one order, and that is many of the utilities challenged the PUC's legal authority to adopt a statewide program. And they have good lawyers. They made a good argument. The PUC ruled against them. But one thing that I would hope the study would look at is whether the statute should be amended to make explicit that if the PUC chooses to do so, it does have authority to issue the statewide program. And I would recommend that we look at Maine, for example. Maine has a statewide program, and it is paid for by a surcharge on all ratepayers. But it uses the entire state as the rate base. And then it reallocates the money based on percentage of poor people in each utility service territory. So if you're looking at Washington Electric, for example, they would not be dependent on just their ratepayers to pay for this. It would be the statewide population that's the money source, and then it'd be reallocated based on need. So that's the kind of thing I would hope the study would look at.
Okay.
Back to what I was talking about.
Sure.
I'd like to see everyone just discount the rates and make electricity reasonable for everyone. It's the same idea as watching a Toyota ad on television. You buy 3 tires, you get 1 for $1. How many people fall for that? So they can just discount their tires.
Right. So in that vein, I think the study could be really important. And in part, it could look at what they're doing in California as of like a week ago to address that very question. California is now shifting away from volumetric rates, and they're having a fixed rate that's based on income. There are 3 categories. Poor people, and so it's going to not vary from month to month. Poor people pay like $26 a month. Middle income pay, I don't know, 35 or 40 a month, and upper income pay $75 a month. It covers the need. It covers what the utilities need, but it's based on an income rather than how much you use. And the rationale for that is in this day and age, actually most utility costs are not based on how much energy you use. It's much more based on fixed charges now. And that's the basis for the California report. So anyway, I'll leave it at that, the bill as drafted is a great idea. I don't claim to have the answers, but hopefully after a year, we'd have much better answers.
So you're supporting the staff?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Faber, not to put you on the spot, and I don't know if you are prepared to speak to this. Did you want to speak to this?
Yeah, just quickly. We agree with Mr. Dumont. This is an important issue, especially as you move towards electrification of the state. Rates may go up, so you got to look at this. But it's important to take the time to do it. And as you can guess, I'm going to ask for more time to do the study. So January of 2026 seems like a good time for studies. We would like it at least until then, so we can, communicate with the right stakeholders. Look at reducing rates on a statewide basis. Those are all good ideas, but we need to look at those and we need time to do it, given the other stuff we have to do. So we're fine with the report. Just give us the time to do it.
Any questions for Mr. Faber? Yes.
It's not a question, actually, just for ourselves. If we're gonna go that route, we should make it more like November 30th, 25, so we get it before the section and can be ready to.
Well, I'm sorry.
I'm saying maybe 1 month less,
Oh, yeah,
so
yeah.
that we have it in time well before the session. So if we're gonna go that route, I
Right.
want to forget that. Fine.
Makes sense to me.
Other comments? Okay. Yes? No. Okay.
No.
No, you want us to adjourn?
Yeah.
Representatives, we're all set?
So-
Okay, great.